Let me show you today how to make a classic Monte Carlo style cream biscuit. Now this biscuit is an oval shape. Traditionally it's an oval shape with a circular cream insert. First of all, you're going to need to have your two oval shapes of exactly the same size drawn up on a piece of white paper, a sheet of baking paper, non-stick baking paper over the top, and this will allow us to sculpt directly over our shapes. Okay, so we'll need two balls of polymer clay, around about the same size as a large walnut in this case, and we're going to flatten them out using our texturizer, whether that be a scourer, a kitchen scourer. I've got a taxidermy texturizer here, so I'm going to use that, but you really can use anything that's going to leave a nice biscuity looking imprint in your clay. And we're going to work that clay with our texturizer to fit the shape that we've got clearly marked underneath. By doing it this way, we really get our shapes perfectly right, and of course nicely matching, because we're going to sandwich those two together. Now that we have our two oval shapes texturized onto our ovals, you'll see that the Monte Carlo has a classic sort of a striped pattern running through it. This all adds to the realism of the biscuit. So we're just going to use, I'm just using an old needle. I rarely use professional sculpting tools. I often experiment with all sorts of things around the house. So just an old sewing needle here, and we just put some little grooves running along the length of the biscuit. Okay, so that way we've got some nice texturizing for our paint to get trapped in later, and you just work that until you feel that's a good enough effect. I also recommend that you just tidy up your edges of your shapes. That's why a scourer works well, because it's got that nice flat edge. Tidy up your edges, and remember that we want a little bit of a lip on the biscuit, so we don't want this edge to be too fine and flat. Now we need to make our cream for the middle of the biscuit. We need a smaller ball of clay, and we just need to roll that out. Even though we're making an oval biscuit, traditionally the Monte Carlo style of biscuit has a circular cream centre. So we just need to make a little disc to represent our cream. It doesn't need to be perfect, but it does need to be flat, because it's going to be glued sandwich between those two layers. So now we have our little circular cream piece. You can see that because we've sculpted it over that shape, we can see that we've just left a little edge of biscuit remaining that will show. Now those three pieces can go into the oven, and Super Sculpey is usually baked at around about 130 degrees. For something about this size, probably around about 20 to 25 minutes. Our Monte Carlo biscuit pieces are now baked and cooled, and now we start to paint. I'm going to show you a very simple, what I call a rub-off technique. I'm using just an acrylic folk art. I'm using a Joe Sonia's we have here in Australia. Any folk art paint that is just water-based is fine. Okay, and the colours I've used here for this mix, we're going to create, we want like a warm shortbread colour. I have used raw sienna, tiny bit of burnt sienna, and some Turner's yellow, and a little bit of white to lighten it up. So our mixture ends up just a lovely light shortbread colour. Nice big brush. Use just a cheapy brush, because we're going to really give these brushes a bit of a hard time. We need our mix to be quite liquid, because what we want to do is get our paint into all of the little crevices that we've made. Okay, so we're going to get our paint right in there. Now it's a little bit messy, this method, but it's well worth a bit of paint on your fingers. So make sure the entire cookie is covered, and also the edges, the underside. Don't worry too much about the centre, because obviously the cream is going to be in the middle there. that do cover the entire thing, and treat the other one in the same way. Both of our cookie halves are covered in our paint, and while they're still wet, we're going to use the rub-off method. We need a disposable wipe, something like a Chuck's wipe that we use here in Australia. It just needs to be something that you can throw away, but it needs to be clean. I have just dampened this slightly, but it's very slight. Now we just take each half, and what we're going to do is just pat away the excess, and what will remain is just that beautiful light shortbread colour in all of the creases. So it's really just patting away the excess. Don't rub away at it too much, because we're going to add another layer of paint when we're done. So you can see that little two-toned effect happening there. That's what we want, so just do the same with the other side. Our next step is to paint our cream filling, which is just straight white, and you'll need 2 coats. You can see that I'm holding the little cream disc in the centre to try and avoid my fingers a little bit. Don't worry about the centre, because that's going to be sandwiched between the 2 biscuit layers. Our Monte Carlo cookie halves have had a couple of minutes to dry. Now we're going to add our second coat. What we're going to do now, if you can see on this finished Bicky here, we've got the browned surface of the biscuit that we're going to pop on. The trick to doing this successfully is using a big brush. You must use a big brush. You can't run into trouble if you use a big brush. So I've made a mixture up of our raw sienna and our burnt sienna, and I've mixed it up until we've got the colour of a nice browned biscuit, a really nice medium tan. And that's going to brush lightly. We'll get our brush nicely stippled in our paint, and don't have a fully loaded brush. Check it on your paper. Okay, so we don't want our brush absolutely saturated, and we just want to brush across the surface of the biscuit. Now you can see that what we're getting there is we're only catching the risen areas of the biscuit, and that's given us a fantastic realistic look with very little effort. Now remember that a real biscuit is very browned on the edges. Okay, so what we're trying to do is make it look as realistic as we can, and this is absolutely the easiest way to do it. Make sure you catch all those edges where a biscuit would naturally brown in the oven. On all those edges, that's what we do. Remember to check the underside and do our little edges, because we will be seeing a little bit of that. Let's assemble our Monte Carlo biscuit now. I'm just going to show you, if you have a look in the one that I've already made, you can see that there's some lovely raspberry jam sandwiched between those 3 layers. Now we have to use an epoxy resin glue, which is a 2-part epoxy resin glue, which is 24-hour set. The reason I'm using the 24-hour one is because I've got this really cool idea where we've got to sandwich it together, and we've got to have jam in there as well, so we might as well make jam out of our glue. So the easiest way to do that is I've just added perhaps 4 to 5 drops of normal printer ink. We have a Canon printer. That's just the ink that goes into our printer. So any kind of permanent ink will do. It mixes well and it cures just as well. Now I'm using a very old paintbrush, one that I'll be able to throw away. Now the epoxy 24-hour is, you have to remember that it's going to be runny for longer, which means it's going to travel further than a 5-minute glue. So we have to bear that in mind. I want you to paint the underside of your cream disc, and we do want some of that jam, our lovely jam, to ooze out. It's a great idea colouring your resin like this. You can use the same technique with different colours. You can make beautiful lemon curd just by adding yellow instead of the red. I'm going to pop a little more on this one. I'm going to hope we get a really tasteful overflow, which we should do. pop our second one on. And fingers crossed, so to speak. We're going to give it a little squeeze. See that lovely little runoff we've got happening there? Okay, so we don't want that to move. I'm going to set that one down nicely next to its twin brother. We'll let that set for 24 hours and then we'll come back for the final finish, which is a lovely matte varnish. The final step to our Monte Carlo Vicky is just a matte varnish glaze for over the top. I'm using a water-based matte varnish. Anything that can be used with acrylic paints is fine. Make sure that you get into all of the cream areas there. So that's our Monte Carlo Vicky all done. Once that matte glaze dries, you see that we get a nice satin matte finish. Pop them on a little plate and you're done. We'll see you next time.